Welcome back to Truth Serum. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a topic that's been making headlines for centuries, actually, the anti-vaccine movement.
Hmm.
It's kind of surprising to think that something so prevalent today has roots going back, well, so far.
Yeah, it is. It's true. Vaccine skepticism, it's not a new phenomenon,
Yeah,
And it's a fascinating look at how anxieties, public anxieties, and scientific understanding and how social movements kind of all intersect.
for sure. Let's start with those early anxieties. So where did it all begin?
Okay. Well, even before we had the concept of vaccination as we know it, right?
Right.
There was resistance to practices like variolation,
Yeah.
for smallpox in the 18th century.
Very LH. Okay, now that was the practice of like deliberately exposing someone to a milder form of smallpox to build immunity, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even then, there were concerns about, interfering with nature or divine will.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some people saw disease as a form of divine judgment and thought that trying to prevent it was going against nature.
It's interesting how those themes of, divine intervention and going against nature still echo in some modern anti-vaccine argument.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And if you fast forward to Edward Jenner and his revolutionary smallpox vaccine
Hmm?
in the late 18th century, you would think people would be thrilled, but there was immediate pushback.
It seems like a pattern.
Yeah.
A groundbreaking medical discovery is met with a wave of skepticism.
Hmm.
So what were some of the objections back then?
Oh, many of the same ones we hear today.
Really?
People questioned its safety. They worried about unknown long-term effects,
Hmm.
And some viewed it as an infringement on personal liberty.
Wow, that's amazing.
Mm.
So many of the same concerns persist even after centuries of scientific advancement. It makes you wonder how much of this is rooted in distrust of authority.
Yeah, for sure. That distrust definitely plays a role, especially as organized opposition to vaccination started to take shape. In the 19th century, with the introduction of mandatory vaccination laws in England, anti-vaccination leagues began to spring up.
Wait, anti-vaccination leagues. So these weren't just individuals expressing concern. They were forming organized groups.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They held rallies, they published pamphlets, and they actively lobbied against vaccination efforts.
Wow.
One of their biggest strongholds was in Leicester, England. They even held this massive demonstration in 1885. It was the Leicester Demonstration March, and it drew a crowd of 80,000 to 100,000 people.
Wow, that's an incredible turnout. It really highlights the power of social movements and the strength of public sentiment, even back then.
Yeah, it does. And, the government, they did respond to this pressure. They
Yeah.
formed a commission to study vaccination, and ultimately they removed penalties for refusing vaccination
Oh, wow.
and included a conscientious objector clause.
So in a way, these leagues, despite opposing scientific advancements, helped shape public health policy by pushing for individual choice.
Hmm.
It's fascinating how these tensions have been playing out for so long.
Yeah, that's a great point. And this pattern wasn't limited to just England.
Right.
Similar anti-vaccination leagues emerged in the United States around the same time, and they raised similar concerns about government overreach and individual rights.
Oh, interesting. Did the anti-vaccine movement in the U.S. have a similar impact on public policy?
Well, while they didn't achieve the same legislative changes as in England, their influence was definitely felt. The debate over mandatory vaccination reached the Supreme Court in 1905 with the landmark case of Jacobson v. Massachusetts.
And that case upheld mandatory vaccination laws, right?
It did, yes.
Yeah.
The court ruled in favor of public health, acknowledging the state's authority to enforce vaccination for the greater good. But even with this legal precedent, the concerns and the anxieties persisted, and this kind of laid the groundwork for future iterations of the anti-vaccine movement.
So even though the anti-vaccine movement faced legal setbacks, it never really went away.
Mm.
It just adapted, and continued to challenge the scientific and medical consensus on vaccines.
That's exactly right. It's remarkable how these movements, fueled by, a mix of distrust, misinformation, and these evolving social anxieties, have managed to, stay relevant and find new ground to stand on over the centuries.
Okay, let's move into the 20th century. So what happens next in this story?
As we move into the 20th century, we see the anti-vaccine movement kind of shifting its focus to new vaccines and new anxieties.
So what were some of the key controversies that fueled the movement during this time?
Well, one of the major flashpoints was the DTP vaccine in the 1970s. This vaccine, which protects against diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, whooping cough, became the center of a really heated debate.
What sparked the controversy surrounding the DTP vaccine?
Okay, so a report in the UK suggested a possible link between the DTP vaccine and neurological problems in some children.
Oh, wow.
And this report, despite being later refuted, it created this wave of fear and uncertainty among parents.
So even without, like, conclusive evidence, this report had a significant impact on public perception.
Absolutely, yeah. It really tapped into those existing fears about vaccine safety and potential, unknown side effects.
Right.
So this incident really highlights the power of information and sometimes misinformation in shaping public opinion.
And this wasn't just, like, a fleeting concern, right? This controversy led to more organized opposition to the DTP vaccine.
Yeah, it did. Advocacy groups like the Association of Parents of Vaccine-Damaged Children, APVDC, emerged, and they really amplified concerns about the DTP vaccine and pushed for more research into its safety.
It's interesting how the media can play a role in these situations, both in spreading, like, accurate information and sometimes unintentionally amplifying fears.
Oh, absolutely. Media coverage of the DTP controversy, while often intending to inform the public, sometimes it contributed to the growing anxiety by focusing on the potential risks without fully exploring the scientific evidence.
So this controversy really set the stage for the modern anti-vaccine movement as we know it today.
In many ways, yes. It really solidified a pattern of questioning vaccine safety, even when scientific consensus overwhelmingly supported their use.
Right.
And this pattern continued to gain momentum in the late 20th and early 21st century.
And of course, we can't talk about the modern anti-vaccine movement without mentioning Andrew Wakefield and the MMR controversy.
Right. In 1998, Wakefield published a now retracted study in Lancet that falsely linked the MMR vaccine to autism.
Right.
And this study, despite being, thoroughly debunked and discredited by the scientific community, had a lasting impact on public perception of vaccines.
It's incredible how a single fraudulent study could have such a widespread and enduring effect. What do you think made Wakefield's claims so potent?
Well, there are a few factors at play here.
Okay.
First, the study tapped into a growing concern among parents about autism, a condition that was, at the time, not well understood.
Right.
Second, the claim was simple and emotionally resonant. One vaccine could lead to a devastating developmental disorder. And the simplicity, it made it really easy to grasp and to share, even though it was scientifically inaccurate.
And this was happening just as the internet and social media were becoming major forces in shaping public opinion.
Exactly. The rise of the internet and social media, it created an entirely new landscape for spreading information, both accurate and inaccurate.
Right.
And Wakefield's claims, amplified by these online platforms, found a receptive audience in communities that were already skeptical of vaccines and mainstream medicine.
So we have this historical distrust of vaccines, a new and frightening claim about autism, and the perfect platform for spreading misinformation. It's a potent combination.
Indeed. And the anti-vaccine movement, they quickly learned how to utilize these tools. They effectively use emotionally charged language, personal anecdotes, and appeals to medical freedom to spread their message.
We also saw the emergence of movements like Greenar vaccines, which focused on concerns about ingredients like thimerosal, a mercury-containing preservative that was once used in some vaccines.
Right. Well, thimerosal was removed from most childhood vaccines in the U.S. as a precautionary measure, despite, no conclusive evidence linking it to harm. The fear surrounding it persists in some circles.
Right.
And this highlights another tactic of the anti-vaccine movement, latching onto specific ingredients or components of vaccines, even when those concerns are not supported by scientific evidence.
It seems like the anti-vaccine movement has a remarkable ability to adapt and find new fuel for its fire, whether it's a flawed study, a specific ingredient, or even, a global pandemic.
You've hit the nail on the head. The movement it's incredibly resilient, and it's constantly finding new ways to frame its arguments and appeal to a wider audience.
Okay, so we've seen how historical trends, specific incidents, and the rise of online platforms have all contributed to the growth of the modern anti-vaccine movement. How has this movement intersected with politics, especially in recent years?
I think, it seems we can't ignore the impact of politics on the vaccine debate.
We saw how different political ideologies kind of aligned with different stances on vaccine mandates and
Well,
safety.
and this politicization, it further amplified existing divisions and made it even more challenging to have nuanced conversations about vaccines, you know?
It's like the debate became less about the science and more about political identity.
Exactly. And this makes it even harder for public health officials and scientists to effectively communicate with the public.
Hmm.
When trust in institutions is eroded, people are more likely to seek out information that just confirms their existing beliefs,
Right.
even if that information is inaccurate.
It's a difficult situation, but what can be done to counter this trend of misinformation and distrust?
Well, one important step is to just recognize the emotional and social factors that contribute to vaccine hesitancy. You know,
Yeah,
it's
fair.
not always simply a matter of logic or scientific literacy.
So we need to approach these conversations with empathy and understanding,
Yeah.
recognizing that people's concerns about vaccines are often deeply personal and influenced by a variety of factors.
Exactly. Yeah. Dismissing people's concerns or labeling them as anti-science is not going to be effective. We
Yeah.
need to listen to their perspectives, you know,
Mhm.
address their anxieties and build trust through open and honest dialogue.
It's about meeting people where they are and understanding the root causes of their hesitancy, rather than just trying to force feed them facts and figures.
I agree, yeah. Another crucial aspect is promoting media literacy and critical thinking skills.
Hmm.
You know, we need to equip people with the tools to evaluate information,
Right.
identify misinformation, and navigate the complex landscape of online content.
That's a great point. In this age of information overload, it's more important than ever to be able to discern, credible sources from unreliable ones.
Absolutely. And it's a responsibility that falls on all of us. Individuals, educators, policymakers, and the media, you
Okay.
know, we need to work together to create a more informed and discerning public.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the anti-vaccine movement, what are some of the key takeaways that you hope our listeners will remember?
Okay. Well, first, I think it's important to remember that vaccine hesitancy is not a new phenomenon.
Right.
It has a long and complex history, and it's shaped by social, political, and cultural factors.
It's not just about a lack of understanding of science.
Right.
It's about deeply rooted concerns about trust, autonomy, and the role of authority in our lives.
Exactly. Second, I think it's crucial to recognize the power of misinformation
Right.
and the ways in which it can, you know, spread and take hold, especially in the digital age.
We've seen how false claims can be, amplified and shared so quickly, making it challenging for accurate information to cut through the noise.
Right, right. And finally, you know, I think it's essential to approach conversations about vaccines with empathy, respect, and a willingness to listen. You know, we
Mhm.
need to move beyond polarization and engage in thoughtful, nuanced discussions that address the underlying concerns that are driving vaccine hesitancy.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure. It's always fascinating to explore these complex issues and hopefully, you know, contribute to a more informed public discourse.
And to our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you from our discussion? Do you have any questions or perspectives you'd like to share? Feel free to leave a comment on our website or connect with us on social media. And if you have any suggestions for future deep dives, we're all ears. Thanks for tuning in to Truth Serum. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.